And welcome, all of you, to our middle school meeting and our celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. This is a very special occasion. When I was growing up, Earth Day was not something that was on our radar, that schools were celebrating. And to know 50 years later, all around the world, that there are schools and children and teachers and people who care about our world talking and thinking about that relationship is really exciting. And we're so honored to have our two special guests here with us today, Ted Widmer and Karenna Gore. I'm going to start by just shortly introducing Ted Widmer to all of you, and he is going to introduce our guest, Karenna Gore, his very, very special friend. And then we're going to talk a little bit, Karenna and I, and then open it up to questions. So first, Ted Widmer, class of 76, Gordon School. Amazing to have you back here with us virtually. Ted grew up in Boston and in Rhode Island and is a proud graduate, he says, of Gordon School. And Ted told us that he came to Gordon just before the first Earth Day was celebrated in April 1970 when he was in first grade. He went on to attend Moses Brown and Harvard and graduated from the program in history and literature. And he received a PhD from Harvard in American Civilization and is taught there at Brown and is now at the Macaulay Honors College of City University in New York. For New York. Ted does a lot of traveling, not so much now, but did a lot of traveling between New York and Providence, and has been spending the stay-at-home time in Providence. So we're glad to have you back home, Ted. And something this West Wing fan just loves about your background is that you were a speechwriter in the Clinton and Gore administration in the 90s. So Ted, we're so happy to welcome you back to Gordon, and I'll hand it over to you. Let me unmute you.
Noni,
There
thank
you
you.
go, Ted.
Okay, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Karenna, for being here. And it's so nice to have so many students. I can't see very many of you, but I guess you can see me. And my main qualification for today is that I'm so old, I can actually remember the very first Earth Day. And as Noni said, I was very young. I was 6 years old, I think, 6 or 7, and had just started first grade. We had just moved to Providence, and I actually spent the fall semester at a different school. It was a public school that had just been renamed. It had been renamed the Martin Luther King School. For obvious reasons, the country was in mourning, and every community in the nation wanted to honor the great civil rights leader, Martin Luther King. And I went to that school for the fall of 1969, but my parents had heard great things about Gordon, and I went to an interview. And I even remember it was the same office that Noni currently has, and there was a problem in the interview. I climbed up off the sofa and around the bookshelves in the middle of the interview and still got in. I still got into Gordon, and with a scholarship, which was a key fact for my family at the time, and began in this around January, February 1970. And so April, of course, was when the weather was getting nice. And I can't say that I remember all of the political issues around the creation of the first Earth Day, but I remember my assignment in Gordon School that day was to draw the Earth. And it was a pretty good assignment for a first grader. It's basically drawing a circle with some blue and some green. And that was within my scope as an artist in first grade. And I no longer have the drawing, but I still am surrounded by globes. In fact, I didn't even set this up, but you can see one right behind me in my house in Providence. I have maps and globes everywhere. And Gordon taught me both inside the classroom and very much outside the classroom that I was learning all the time in the natural environment and before school started and after school started. And I was thinking about where I was, and that included waiting for carpool to pick me up, where we all would wait out by that little pond that I still don't think I know the name of, but I spent many happy hours running around that pond, or sometimes falling into that pond when friends pushed me in. And that too was part of a natural education that I'm so grateful for. And knowing where I was always important to me in every level of Gordon, in the lower grades, and then the upper school. I remember that's what we called it then. The upper school is equivalent of middle school, I guess now. An enormous mapping project where I, in fact, created an alternative version of the world with different continents and different countries. And I got really into eighth grade approaches to cartography. And that map, I think I might still have, and I'm very happy to donate it to Gordon if Gordon, in fact, wants it.
Absolutely.
Um, and so the foundation I got in this wonderful education, learning about nature as well as about things like history and music and literature, helped me at every other level of my education. It certainly helped me at Moses Brown, although Moses Brown's campus is nowhere near as natural and as green as Gordon's is. And it was also a stroke of genius of Gordon to choose the color green for its uniforms, because it just was sending out a green subliminal message all the time. And I still feel like my Gordon education stayed with me more than my high school education, even more than my college education. It was absolutely fundamental to everything I did later in life. And so later on, when I became a political speechwriter, it was in 1997. So it was the fifth year of the 8-year period of the two terms of Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And that was a time when environmental thinking was coming up fast, largely because of Al Gore. And we were trying to get international agreements agreed upon. And unfortunately, the US Senate refused to ratify what was the big agreement of the year 1997, which was the Kyoto Protocol. And since then, we've seen simultaneously a tremendous rise in the world's desire to have a more meaningful set of environmental policies, and also a tremendous refusal by many nations, including our own, to really take those important steps that will do more for the young people on this call than for anyone else on this call. We are trying to make a better world for all of you to live in. And in my own ongoing and never-ending education, I get some information from books, and I get a fair amount from reading the newspapers online, but I have gotten more education from Karenna Gore than from any other source I can think of. I've known her a long time, probably almost 40 years now, if that's possible, maybe more like 30, between 30 and 40, but we were at Harvard together in the early 1990s when I was a grad student. She was an undergraduate. And then we followed very separate paths in the Clinton-Gore administration. I was a hardworking foreign policy speechwriter, and she was the daughter of the second-ranking person in the entire organization. The Clinton-Gore administration got its name from her father, Al Gore, who was the vice president for 8 years. So we already had studied together at Harvard, and our friendship continued through those years in Washington. And then she moved to New York, and I moved to a couple different college jobs, but we stayed in touch. And I've watched with great admiration as she has built a really important center in New York City called the Center for Earth Ethics at an important theological school, a religious school called Union Theological Seminary, which is attached, slightly different from Columbia University, but very close to Columbia University. And in her time there, she has opened up what her school does, to including all kinds of different religious faiths, including the faiths of indigenous practitioners around the world, and the way people worship the earth and think about the earth as part of their religious practice. And she's met fascinating people around the country. We were just talking about Catherine Flowers, who's a civil rights activist in Alabama, but also talks a lot about nature and environmental policies, and how companies can often discriminate against the poor and people of color who don't have a lot of political power, especially in her state, Alabama. But also a lot of Native Americans are connected to Karenna's center, or indigenous peoples from Central America. There are a lot of indigenous peoples on every continent on this planet. And so she's really helped me to hear these voices that you don't hear so much in our mainstream media. So I'm grateful to her for just helping me think better and see better and hear better. And I think that's the way I began to learn at Gordon School a long time ago, before I even really could read. I was taking in information through my eyes and my ears, and that's a lifelong tribute to Gordon.
Thank you, Ted. We really appreciate your memories of Gordon, and I know a lot of the students are resonating in terms of thinking about the campus and actually missing the campus a lot right now, the ponds and the big fields and whatnot. So thanks for bringing that into to our imagination, and thank you for such a lovely introduction to Karenna, who absolutely sounds like has been a huge influence on how you're navigating the world and your understanding of the world, and that's a special friendship indeed. So without further ado, Karenna Gore, thank you. Welcome to Gordon. And thought we would just open up by hearing a little bit from you about your background, what inspires you. We had so many questions, Karenna, about why you do what you do. Thank you for being here. One note before we start, just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session, and we have a protocol of just letting everyone know who's joining us in a Zoom room that we're recording. So thank you. Sorry about that, Karenna. Go right ahead.
No problem. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and very happy to meet you. Thank you, Ted, for that wonderful introduction, and for your comments. I have heard a lot about Gordon from Ted, and I know it's a really special place. I'm very excited and happy that you all are here on the screen. I also have a middle schooler. He's in 7th grade, and so it's really funny for me to be on the other side. I've been watching him do his schoolwork from on Zoom, and anyway, I wanted to get his tips about how to engage you all today. But he just said, just talk to them like they're regular people, Mom. There's no there's no weird thing you should do. So Earth Day is, it's more than just a random designated day to think about the Earth. This is the 50th anniversary, as has been said, and in 1970, for the first Earth Day, there was just this kind of growing awareness that we share this planet. And there are a few reasons for that. And I think Ted mentioned the first photograph of the Earth from outer space had happened in, I think it was 1968. And if you think about it, nobody had actually seen a picture of the planet that we're sharing, that we're living on and with and of until then. So that was one reason. There was also an awareness because since the Industrial Revolution, which happened in the 19th century, a little bit earlier in England, and then over here in the United States, there was a new way in which humanity was relating to the environment. There were new processes, new factories, and a lot more cutting down of trees, a lot more mining, a lot more focus on getting what was seen as resources in order to build up what we now think of as the economy. And there are many things about that process, which people think of as progress in some ways, that have been exciting and good about raising people's standards of living, making it easy to get from one place to another with transportation, having labor-saving devices. Also, of course, electricity, many things that we can't imagine living without now. But there is one problem with it, which is that there's pollution as a result, and there's depletion of the things like trees. So the pace of cutting down trees and mining things from the earth, and also letting these sorts of, you see the billows of smoke out of smokestacks, letting all of that go into the atmosphere, has not really been something that's been measured, and certainly before 1970 was not really being thought about and measured carefully. And the truth is, and this is something that we know from science, actually a little bit more than some other ways, we're all interconnected with the environment. The words that we use, like environment, is a little bit misleading because it's not separate from us. We breathe the air is in our lungs, we drink the water, and even the soil is in the food. So our bodies are totally made of the earth. There's iron in our blood. We are the earth. And so it's not separate. So if you have all of this pollution in the air and the water, it affects human beings and human health, and also other species. So there was this awareness of that in 1970, and when Earth Day happened and many people turned out to voice their concerns about this and to think about the planet and how we interact and treat it and even consider it, there was, after that, passing of laws, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, there was the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency. And these were really important things. So when we marked the 50th anniversary and they improved things, by the way. So you can even see, if there are people that do measurements in the ice in Antarctica to drill down and look at the ice, and they can see the year that the Clean Air Act passed because the ice is cleaner. So it made a difference in terms of the air quality. So I wanted to say that as a background. There was also an important book that was written in 1962 by a woman named Rachel Carson, named Silent Spring, which talked about the effect of chemicals and pesticides. The reason why she named her book Silent Spring was that pesticides were meant to kill bugs, which were a pain for people in their gardens and so on. But the thing is, the chemical toxins that killed the bugs ended up also killing the birds, because the birds eat the bugs. And so when she said Silent Spring, it was because there was no bird song. The birds weren't singing because they had died. And that's an example of the interconnection and the effect that things like pollution or chemicals can have. It's not always just the immediate effect that it's designed for. Sometimes it's more than that because of this interconnected web of life that we're a part of. So the pollution part has become a real problem, a crisis, which you all probably have heard about, in terms of changing the weather patterns and the climate in the earth. And the way this works, briefly, and I'm sure you all have learned some about this, is that when the carbon dioxide goes up into the air, and also some methane, it is trapped in what we look up and see as the sky. Is not limitless. When you look at the picture from outer space, you can see it's actually more like an eggshell around the Earth. It's a thin layer. And when we put those emissions and up into the atmosphere, the way that the CO2 works is that it traps heat, it traps gases. And so it changes weather patterns. And on average, the Earth has been warming. So if we keep doing it, and pretend that this is just an open sewer that we can dump everything into, then we're going to get worse and worse climate impacts, like stronger storms, wildfires, droughts, heat waves, and so on. And some parts of the earth are more affected than others. Some people are more affected than others. The people who are living in poverty, who are living very close to the land, are much more affected by this. And so this is a question that, let me back up and say how I got into this, and then we'll take questions. My father worked on this issue when he was in the United States Senate, and then when he was vice president. And so he used to give a lot of talks on it. He gave a slideshow presentation. He tried to negotiate some agreements around it. So I heard a lot about this as I was growing up, as I was your age. I was hearing about the problem of what they would call global warming. And I remember the saying, the talk was basically like, if we don't do something about this and change this in the next 10 years, we will start to see stronger storms. We will start to see weather changing. And indeed, that's what happened. We didn't change the trajectory. The question of why is an important one. And that's one of the things that we think about at the Center for Earth Ethics. Why would we not change that if we know that it's causing a problem? But in any event, I didn't go into that work myself until later. I ended up at Union Theological Seminary. It's a small graduate school of religion in New York City. And it's a special place, though, because it's a place in which there were movements like abolitionism, the civil rights movement, were very important at Union. There are ways that that religion has been important to movement building and social change, and particularly in the civil rights movement. I know that you all study that. So think about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher. He actually quoted from his faith tradition from the Bible quite a lot when he was talking about what was going on. Also, they used the organizing power and reach of the churches to build that movement. He also nonviolence was very important to him, and he referenced Jesus as an example of nonviolence. And he was very much concerned with pointing out that there's a difference between justice and laws. There are some laws, and think about the civil rights movement, that were very unjust. It was perfectly legal to discriminate. And so you had to think about, was it right or wrong, apart from whether it was legal or illegal? So I was thinking about these things when I was at Union Theological Seminary as a student. And then I was also thinking about my father's work. And I was thinking about climate change. And I was thinking, what does one thing have to do with another? How can we change this big problem of the pollution and the climate crisis and the depletion, the cutting down of forests? And remember what you know probably from biology class, that carbon dioxide also is sucked up by plants, by the leaves of trees and plants. So when you're putting more carbon dioxide in the air and you're cutting down more trees, it's even more of a problem. And that's what we've been doing on this planet. So I was thinking, how do we change this? Obviously, people know the science and they know the data, and it's not enough. How do we change this? And thinking about the example of the civil rights movement and how people showed that even though all this is legal, because all of this that we're doing, for the most part, the drivers of the climate crisis are legal and they're in line with social norms. So how do we change that? The Center for Earth Ethics really tries to think about that. And ethics is about questions of values, of right and wrong, and about how we live. And so one thing that I find useful, and we work, let me say, we work through classes, through education, through public programming, gathering people to speak, and hopefully having that influence the way other people think and speak about this issue, and also through movement building. So, for example, just like there was a march on Earth Day, the first Earth Day in 1970, there was a march in 2014 called the People's Climate March, where many people came out in the streets in New York City and other places to say, we care about this. We want something to be done about this. There are also smaller such occasions where people can come together to voice which is how it happens in a democracy, to voice how we want laws and policies to change. So we're involved in that as well. And I met Catherine Flowers. I'm so delighted that she has this wonderful connection to Gordon, because she is working in Alabama on exactly those connections, the civil rights movement connection to the climate movement connection, and how we can also lift up the voices of the people who are most impacted by the pollution, and also by the climate impacts once since the planet is already warming and there are these stronger storms coming, and heat waves. So we work in those ways at the Center for Earth Ethics. And I thought it might be, I just want to end with a construct that I thought was helpful from a friend of mine at the Church of Sweden to think about Earth ethics. So he said that whenever there's any decision that's being made about in the environment, or about energy policy, or economics, there should be 3 empty chairs in the room. And each chair should be designated for those who are going to be most affected by the decisions made, but also least likely to have a voice in those decisions. And those 3 empty chairs should be for the poor and marginalized peoples of the world, for future generations, and for all non-human life. So if we think about it, if we had been paying attention to those 3 chairs, we would not be at this point of crisis. So justice is smart. Justice is taking care of the health of the whole. When Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," what he was talking about is actually what we're learning about in the climate crisis. That pollution on one side of the world that may be locally just affecting these people, which is unjust, is going to end up affecting all of us, because the aggregate effect of that is changing our whole planetary health and well-being. So we do interesting work at the Center for Earth Ethics. And you know what has made the most difference recently in the climate, in this climate movement, in our ability to think about the Earth? The voices of young people. This is a really exciting part of this movement and this time. The most famous one is Greta Thunberg, because she is really an unusual person in the way that she presents herself and speaks. She's very, very serious. She's from Sweden. She's vowed not to fly or buy any new things. And she speaks with a lot of force on behalf of younger generations, saying, you all must change this. We must change this. It is young people who are going to be living with it more than anyone else. And we're not going to let this keep happening. And she started the school strikes, which have made a difference on Fridays. And but there are many others. There are lots of other young people other than Greta in every community who are starting to speak up about this in different ways. And so I want to say that I have a great deal of respect for the perspective that you all bring and the power, the real power of your voices in this time. So thank you so much for inviting me to talk about Earth ethics, and happy Earth Day.
Karenna, thank you so much. And thank you for ending with that encouragement to our young people about the difference that they can make. And I know so many already are doing that. I'm going to jump right into our questions. And I don't know, Mr. Bernstein, if you can spotlight folks as I call them out. We'll try to see if we can get their faces up. But our first question is from Violet Orth in our 7th grade. And this, I think, relates to some of the things that you've been talking about, Karenna, and been working on in terms of changing kind of a mindset, or changing kind of our ethical stance in terms of our relationship with the natural world. And it relates to the time period or the moment that we're in right now. She says, I've read articles about things like sea turtles on the beaches of Florida breeding more, and seen pictures of formerly polluted water looking clearer. As the world will eventually and slowly come out of self-quarantine, what lessons do you hope we will have learned about reversing climate damage?
Thank you. That is such a great question. So We do need to think about this time of COVID-19 and coronavirus. And let me say that for anyone here who has been personally affected with people sick or suffering or even dying in your communities, we want to acknowledge that this is a difficult time, challenging time, and it's not easy for everyone to be able to follow these guidelines. It is a time of revealing and teaching us, though, many things, and this is one of them. We see that that when there's less polluting activity, nature begins to heal. And in your question, put it perfectly. So what do we do? All right. Well, for one thing, we can switch our energy system away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy, and then we won't have all this problem with the pollution. So why have we not been doing that? Well, at first, those technologies like solar panels and wind turbines and geothermal even were not as available and accessible. They were a little bit more expensive. But now they are accessible and available, and they are less expensive. The problem is that there are people who really want us to stay with the old way because they already have a lot of money invested in it. And those people are really connected to decision makers. So that's where, like in the civil rights movement, there has to be a movement. You know, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. So that's where we are. We have to use this moment of awareness and revealing to say, we actually are going to push harder for this change to renewable energy. So I think that that's probably the most important thing. And then there are other things like energy efficiency and lifestyle changes. Maybe we don't need to have people, and again, and it's different, you know, not everybody is the same in their use of energy. People who are wealthy people in wealthier countries are doing much more polluting. So we have to look at that as more responsibility. How do we culturally switch to say, if you don't need to be flying all over the place and have, you know, lots of different houses and cars, shift towards sustainability and efficiency, and to do that, to encourage that a little bit more. Some of this is about laws and policies, and some of this is about culture. So we can all do our part.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I have a question from Zoe Frank in 6th grade. And she's asking, if you're not a scientist, how do you get good, accurate information about the Earth?
Well, this is one of the great things about technology and the internet, is that you can go on different sites and get information. It's also challenging, though, I know, because there's lots of different types of information out there, and you don't know necessarily what to trust. So I would recommend the Climate Reality Project. That was my father founded that. Catherine Flowers is on the board of the Climate Reality Project, and she's a friend of Gordon. There is pieces of information on there that are pretty clearly put, and you can get it that way. You can go directly to the scientists' reports. You can read the important scientific body that is studying climate change is called the International Panel on Climate Change. They say the IPCC for short. And they do reports every now and then. If you wanted to see what one of them looked like, you can Google or whatever search engine you use, and it will come up. It's pretty dense, and there's a lot of charts and graphs, but it's kind of interesting to see what it looks like. And then, like I said, I would recommend Climate Reality Project, but there are lots of other organizations that also do this work really well, kind of distilling and simplifying that information and then giving it to the public.
Oh, wonderful. That's a great resource for us. Thank you. All right, our next question is coming from Calder Smith Montrose. He's in 6th grade. They watched a video, Karenna, that you gave a talk on, and so he's referencing this video. It says, you talk about some cultures have a respect for their elders in a way that American society does not. What do you think would happen if we treated our Earth as an elder?
Oh, wow. what a great question.
Isn't it?
It is. And you know, it's interesting because because uh, one of the things that Native American cultures, in my experience, do have a special place for elders. And I remember looking in this COVID-19 coronavirus time, seeing somebody put up that it's older people that are generally most affected by this and likely to die. And someone put up from Native communities saying, we have to protect our elders. Some of them are the last ones to know the language, because some of the native languages haven't been passed on. And so that respect for elders and traditions in that way is something just among human beings that I think that we should all consider and emulate in our society as well. Really, in this time, you can take time to talk to your elders, to older people about their memories, and really use this time when we have things sheltering in place to do that. In terms of thinking of the earth as an elder, the Native people say Mother Earth often, and there is this feeling that this is a living being. Actually, it's not an object. It's not just something that we take from. And in fact, this concept of reciprocity, which means, to give and take, it's balance. The way that some Native elders see this is we've just been taking. And we've forgotten that we're in relationship here. And so this is the result. This kind of ecological breakdown is the result. So if we think about the earth as mother, as elder, then that means we take care, and this can be done in many ways. It can be done by not littering. It can be done by even your thoughts, even your acknowledgement, when you are eating food, or when you're putting on clothes, or when you're sitting on furniture. It's not just objects that are here because we're dominating the earth and we're in control. It's actually from the earth, from everything that we're using. All wealth is derived from this biosphere of the planet. There's no wealth that doesn't come from that. So to destroy it in order to get more wealth makes no sense. One other thing to say about that is that it brings to mind that some cultures consider rivers and different bodies of water and mountains to be themselves ancestors. I was thinking about in New Zealand, there is a law that actually tries to protect this river, and the Maori, the native people of New Zealand, say this river is our ancestor. This is our most important ancestor. This is what's brought together people over the years on the banks of this river. So you can't just pollute whatever you want into it. You can't divert it and take the water out so it'll trickle down. We're going to protect it. And the only way that you can protect it in law on that level is to give it what they call personhood, legal personhood. But really what that means is just to acknowledge it as an ancestor and as a living being. Thank you so much. It was a great question.
Awesome, thank you. So our next question comes from a fifth grader, Francis Highsmith, and I think it's related to some of the things you were saying about what we could do. Francis is asking if you could change anything about humans produce energy, about how humans produce energy, oil, gas, etc. What would it be? This question about if we had to focus, or if you had advice on how to focus our energies around energy production. What advice, counsel, thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I think it would be really, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I think it would be wonderful to use the sunshine as much as we can. The sun is so powerful. Some people also, back to the other question, think some cultures say grandfather sun, grandmother moon. The sun is so powerful, and I think we should use that power a lot more. It's like a gift. And so solar panels are the technology to do that. And what I would do is I would put solar panels on roofs everywhere that we can have those solar panels, so that way we don't have to keep digging and burning all this stuff from the inside of the earth, all the oil and gas and coal that we're doing now, and instead just receive the light and the power from the sun. That would be the main thing that I would change.
Excellent, thank you. A question from Ren Crystal Hall, and excuse me, George Ugers first. If you could go back in time and there was one big problem you could fix to help climate change, what would it be?
Oh boy. Go back in time. Well, I think it's a really good question. That's a hard one. There are a lot of people that are wrestling with that. You know, some people are writing whole books right now about, there's a book called Losing Earth by Nathaniel Rich, which is all about this. Like, what was it that we should have done differently? And I think what it would have been is when people first learned about this, which was actually, you know, people knew about the effect of burning coal as far back as even 100 years ago, I think. We'll have to ask Ted, our historian, to tell us when. But there was a time in the 1970s where people realized the scope of this, the very serious nature of this problem. And there were some people in the industries of the oil and gas, and you know, I'm not saying that these are all bad people, but the way they thought about it is, this is our business. We have to do our business plan. So we don't want to stop anything to stop our business plan. So some of them hired people to do sort of public relations controls and to try to change the messaging. Instead of going, oh, this is a big mistake, let's stop it right now, and let's switch to doing another kind of energy, they said, let's make sure nobody finds out about this. So if we could go back in time, we would get them all together in a room and appeal to the better nature of all those people, because as individuals, I'm sure they would probably make the right decision. But when they're all together just thinking about their business profits, they didn't make the right decision. So going back in time, I would say, how do we make sure that the truth of what they knew then is open to everybody, and that they're able to change that decision that they made, and instead say, let's shift gears and have another business plan. Let's not lie to anybody. Let's not cover this up. Let's instead all try to solve it together. That's what I would change.
Thank you. All right, Ren Crystal Hall in 6th grade wants to know, do you have any favorite traditions on Earth Day?
Good question. You know, not really. I was thinking it would be so nice to plant seeds on Earth Day, but it's a little bit too cold. I'm in the Catskills right now in New York, and we actually had a little snow flurry this morning, so I don't think I can plant seeds. Talking to young people seems like a great tradition to start. And so I like all of you, I might be thinking about starting a tradition, but I don't yet really have one, except looking at a picture of the Earth. I've done that every Earth Day, and not easy to miss, I would say. You can look at a picture of that Earth, that beautiful Earth from outer space. That's a good tradition, and just take a moment to reflect on it, and that we are all just tiny, 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 tiny dots in that living whole. So that's kind of a tradition. Thank you.
That's a good perspective to have, and I know we'll all think about maybe traditions we'll start as well. This is a question from Lola Aguirre in 6th grade, and this has to do with really how we use our privilege. And she wants to know, does being a white woman impact how people look at you when you give a speech? How does being Al Gore's daughter impact how people look at you when you give a speech?
These are all such great questions. Wow, you all have really thought deeply. You're amazing. So yeah, thank you. So definitely, this understanding of the role that white supremacy has played in our country and in the way that our society treats nature is really important. And that means acknowledging white privilege, and that's something I have had for my whole life. I'm aware of that, and it's important to be aware of. I think in terms of, I think that gives an obligation to lift up other voices from communities, particularly communities of color, and their perspectives. Not because of a guilt thing, or trying to make myself look good, or not because of that, but actually because they're so powerful and interesting. And it's been missing. It's part of why we've gotten into this mess, is that it's been missing. So it's important, I think, mainly to try to do your part to lift up those voices. And so in our Center for Earth Ethics, we try to do that as much as possible. I'll be on a panel I put together a panel on Sunday, which will be online. I could send you the link maybe, in case anyone's interested. And I'm on a panel with Catherine Flowers, with Lila June Johnston, who's a Dene Navajo woman, and with Seneca Johnston, who's actually an 18-year-old Native American climate activist who's part of something called YUCCA, Youth United for Climate Action. So that was the panel I put together because I felt like those are the voices that are most interesting and that I want to learn from. So that's one way. In terms of being Al Gore's daughter, I'm really proud of my father, and I want to honor him. And that's another thing I've learned from Native American cultures, is that, you don't have to be, it's actually a really good honorable part of life to honor your elders, and to understand that, when you've been, when they've done work that you can acknowledge and pick up, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So I want to honor him and respect him like that. And I also though see that that might mean that I get more speaking opportunities. People might see my name and think, oh, let's have her because she's Al Gore's daughter. And then they might miss somebody like Catherine Flowers, who has a whole other perspective. So I just try to kind of navigate that a little bit. And I also try to do things a little differently so that I'm not losing myself in just repeating his work, but also trying to say, well, I bring some different things. I've had a different life and a different experience. So honor him, but also bring my own to it, and just be grateful for those opportunities that I can show up and be there.
Great. I know there's some middle school parents who are happy to hear about honoring parents.
Yeah.
So fifth grader, we might have two more questions to come, but this comes from fifth grader, Sam Doherty Rogers. And Sam is asking, if you could have any other job, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I always kind of wanted to be more, I think I'd like to be an artist. I would love to be a playwright, honestly. Not to say that I would do community service and be on parts of organizations that are helping to give back to our community and society in certain ways. I would always do that kind of work. But I would love to write plays. I think it would be really cool to use creative power and tell stories. And sometimes people learn and understand things even more through stories. So I would probably spend some time trying to figure out how you write a really good play, and then be able to sit and watch actors come and act it out. And I would try to say everything deepest in myself that I feel through the story of the actors in the play. So there's my fantasy alternate career.
Love it, love it. So are you ready for a quick lightning round before we let the fifth through seventh graders go and you have some time with eighth graders?
Sure.
All right. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Coffee.
Favorite color?
Purple.
First job ever?
Assistant at a local newspaper.
Cool. All right, be careful with this one with New Englanders, and you're in New York. Favorite sports team?
Knicks.
Yes. Right.
Nice. That's rough. That's rough.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Oh, no.
Excellent.
Sorry about that.
I know. I think that's a good way to end. Karenna, thank you so much on behalf of we have some Red Sox fans who are shouting out. Thank you so much for being with with our fifth through seventh graders. We are appreciating you that you're going to stay and talk with our eighth graders. And Mr. Bernstein has an announcement for the middle school before the fifth through seventh graders depart.
Yes, thank you so much, Karenna. This was such a treat. Very quick announcements. So we went over a little bit, which I'm so glad that we did. We're going to go, if you look at your schedules, fifth graders, it says section A has library, 11:15 to 11:45. Whatever class was starting for everybody at 11:15, you're just starting that at 11 right now. So you'll go there. So section A is going to head to library, and section B is going to head to humanities. For sixth grade right now, you all are in math labs. And for seventh grade, right now, section A has independent work for math, and sections B and C are both going to go meet with Miss Garfield right now. So B and C, humanities with Garfield. Thank you all for coming. Eighth grade, hang tight. And this was such a joy.
All right, thank you. Fifth, sixth, seventh grade. We'll see you soon. Eighth graders, thanks for hanging in there.
Noni, can I say something quickly?
Ted, please go right ahead.
By coincidence, the great movie made by Karenna's dad, An Inconvenient Truth, is on TV tonight. If you have Turner Classic Movies, it's on at 8 o'clock. And that is a great way to get up to speed on the climate issue. And he talks about how he got involved as a young man and takes the story through the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century. And if you haven't seen it, it's just a great way to begin to figure it out.
Thanks for that reminder, Ted. Okay, all right, our eighth graders are here. Just going through. We might have some rogue fifth, sixth, seventh graders left, which is fine. All right, eighth grade, good to see you all. Welcome. So happy to give you some time to ask Karenna your burning questions. And I'm gonna mute you all. And you can, I believe, unmute yourselves. And I'm gonna unmute our guest, of course. And we'll have your hands up first. We're just gonna dive right in.
Eighth grade, you're the only grade we trust to unmute yourselves, by the way.
So some of you sent some great questions, and I have them here. But if you have them in front of you, want to ask. Looking through for any raised hands.
Harry and Maud had hands raised.
Okay, great. Sorry. If you can do the digital hand raise, that would be great because there's so many screens, I can't see your physical hands. So Maud, do you want to start?
Sure. I just kind of had a question about, you said that you think the picture of Earth from space really changed how people saw the climate. And I was wondering what other big moments in history you think have really changed the fabric of the climate change movement?
So I mentioned one other one. When I talked about the book in 1962 called Silent Spring, that's not the only important book, but it was an idea. It was a reframing of how we talk and think about our relationship to the earth. And there were other very important books and ideas like that along the way. And so in terms of events, there have been, I think recently, the big storms, Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, some of these things, the wildfires in California, these are also really important events because people are starting to see, oh, something is happening, something is different. It's tricky, right? Because there's always been occasional extreme weather events. That's been part of life on Earth as long as humanity's been here. But something about the frequency and intensity of these hurricanes, stronger storms, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, the melting ice and the like. I think that when we had Superstorm Sandy and it flooded into the basement of where they were building the memorial to 9/11, and it came over Lower Manhattan. That's an example of an event that I think is changing, and also those ideas. And I will say I'm happy to answer these. Ted might also have an answer. And so Ted, wave your hand if you can think of an, yeah.
Well, it's hard to think of today as history, but I think what we are now living through is one of the great chances to rethink everything that we do, that we will ever see. We don't know the end result of it, of course. It's a tragic time in all kinds of ways, and everyone feels the sadness of the elderly and the sick and all the people suffering, all the people who have lost loved ones already. At the same time, we are seeing nature rebounding. We're seeing signs of wildlife populations on the increase without human beings attacking them or eating them or just building into their environments. Emissions, carbon emissions, methane are way, way, way down. And we have a rare chance, if we seize it, to build back in a much better way than we've been living. But it'll take a tremendous amount of political will, and it will take some unanimity, Republicans and Democrats working together. And honestly, we have no sign of that happening right now. So politics is a mess, but we have a big chance to rethink how we live our lives and how all the peoples of the earth, the virus attacks everyone. It doesn't stop at a national boundary or a state boundary. So this is one of the great historic chances to do better.
Thank you, Ted. Harry Jelinek, I think you were next.
Yeah, well, I guess we went through like 5th grade and we studied this like climate change a lot. And I guess it feels like being a 14-year-old, like, there might not be a ton that we can do. And I know that like we know a lot about like this issue and how big of a deal this is. But sometimes like I find myself wondering, like, it's not like we can donate to an organization or like put solar panels on a roof. So like, yeah, what would you have to say about that?
Well, I think that I do understand that concern, but your voice is the most powerful thing, which it can be used in different ways. Together with others in organizations like there's Friday for Futures that Greta Thunberg started. There's Earth Guardians. There's Earth Uprising. There are, I'm trying to think of the names of some of these other youth climate groups. There are a lot of them now. And when young people speak together on this issue, it's very powerful because there's no doubt there's moral authority in the voice coming from someone who's young, saying, hang on, I just got here in life, and I've got my whole life ahead of me, and how can we tolerate you all going and depleting all of these precious natural resources and polluting this air to the extent that we're the ones that are going to be living with the result. And it's basically, it's when you take it to an ethical or a moral equation, it's so simple. It's just selfish and short-sighted how people are treating the earth right now, as a collective. And so young people speaking and saying, no, we need you to be thinking about what it's going to look like when I'm in my 60s, in my 50s and 60s, when I'm that way, what is that going to look like, when you're making decisions today? So I would say using your voice, joining with other youth in some of those organizations, or on your own, writing, a comment, making a comment in any kind of forum or dinner discussion table in any way, I think has a lot more power than you may realize. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Deanna.
Hi. So I was thinking about how when we grow up, we're thinking about all these things we might want to do in the future, like, I don't know, being a doctor or a vet or an astronaut. And I was wondering if there was a specific moment where you remember that fighting climate change was what you wanted to do.
That's a good question. It was not that long ago, to be honest, because my father was doing a lot of work on climate change. So it was kind of like what he was doing. And I didn't want to sort of just say, oh yeah, I want to do that too, and kind of, follow along. But when I was at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, just about 5 years ago, and I was thinking that what does religion and spirituality and ethics have to do with this climate crisis I've been hearing about my whole life? And there was actually a moment, in the sense that the United Nations is in New York City. And the United Nations is the place, obviously, it's the only thing that we have that's close to world government, where all the countries come together to make decisions and agreements. And the United Nations, there was a climate summit, a set of meetings about how are we going to deal with this climate problem in September 2014, which was the time that I was at Union. I was a student there. I know I was a little bit old. I was like a student in my later, like a midlife kind of degree. And I was a student there, and then I had a job there, a kind of general public programming job. So anyway, when the United Nations said, we're going to have this climate summit meeting, and I was working at Union, and I was thinking, what do these two things have to do with each other? I thought, okay, I do have a role to play. I'm going to organize a gathering here where we hear from the indigenous peoples and the leaders of different religions, and some philosophers, and they can all come to Union when the UN has that meeting, and they can talk about how we need to solve this from the point of view of philosophy, indigenous wisdom, and religion. So I organized that conference, Religions for the Earth, it was called. So that was the moment when I really decided that I wanted to go into this work. And again, it wasn't that long ago, so I'm new to it too, in a way.
Wonderful. Ava.
Okay. So you were talking about in the session we just had with the whole middle school about how there's like a lack of representation a lot of times, like in history and everything like that. And like I was kind of thinking about it with, you could think about it with like Columbus even and stuff like that. And like for example, I was recently writing about like juvenile centers and like the lack of representation in like courts and everything like that. But do you think that like the lack of representation in small issues, do you think that contributes to the larger scale issues?
Yes, I do. I think that when we haven't heard from voices that show these perspectives of not having been part of the dominant force and power in this country, then we don't get the critique that we need to get to make the changes we need to make. So let me just say for a moment that one of the ways in which I think this is a really deep history point, I mean, meaning far back in time, the whole reason why the European, so white people are basically like European Americans, like we say African Americans and Native Americans and white people. There's a whole body of work around sort of understanding what we mean by white. So we don't have too much time to get into that. But basically, when people came to this land that we're in now from Europe, one of the main things that was driving that was this actually was religious. It came from the Vatican, from the sort of colonial powers of Europe. The Vatican issued this decree. They called it a papal bull. And this is when the monarchs, it is 1492 and all that, back in that history. So the papal bull said that because of the Bible and the book of Genesis, and some people have interpreted dominion in the book of Genesis to mean domination and control. So basically these papal bulls said, you have a right given by God to go and conquer, vanquish, and subdue all of the peoples of Africa and the Americas. And they said that not any non-Christian people, which was everybody there at the time, are part of the flora and fauna. So the fact that that's the way that quote unquote white people came here, I think says a lot about the joined mistake of white supremacy dominating native people and people from Africa, and also treating nature, trees, water, the earth as object resources to be dominated and exploited, and to disrespect the cultures that were already there, that had ties of balance and harmony. So I think the fact that we've told our stories, our histories, and our political narrative all through the perspective of people who came from that white lineage has caused us to miss a lot of what we would have otherwise gotten had we looked at that other perspective. So I absolutely think that it's contributed to the mistakes that we've made around ecology and climate, and that right now, if we take this opportunity, there's so much wonderful, creative, innovative energy there for us to make a better world in all kinds of ways.
Great, thank you. Juliet, you're up.
Okay, so I know you talked about like student activists like Greta before, but even those who like aren't as much involved in climate change, what would you say like everyone else in the world, as in like adults, should take from their leadership, like should take away from what they've done in the world, especially recently?
I think that what should they take away from the leadership of Greta and the youth? What should adults take away, right?
Yes.
Be sure I'm getting that. Yeah. Well, for one thing, I think that telling the truth in really stark terms. You know, there's been a lot of the way that climate change, climate crisis is very difficult to talk about, because a lot of people say, oh, don't say it this way because that's too scary. It's too scary. It'll turn people off. Talk about hope. talk about this, talk about it this way. Don't talk too much about the science, it's too complicated. Don't, there's a lot of wrestling around how do we talk about this. And a lot of the leadership has been trying to say it, or trying to say it in ways that are more, politically savvy, or more not trying to scare people. And what Greta and other youth activists have done is said, no, tell us the truth. Stop it. This is how bad it is. And it is an emergency. And, she says things like, our house is on fire. I want you to panic. That's how she talks. So that's been one of the main messages, is basically like, stop pretending that this is in any way getting better or okay right now, and tell us the truth, and look and let the science speak for itself. Don't let people ignore it by trying to make a whole other way of talking about it. So I would say that that, and as I said before, also the kind of ethical question of, it's not fair to future generations to do this. It's a justice question as well as everything else.
Thank you. Posey.
Okay, so I have it written down. So as you know, most people aren't educated in this topic. So how do you think we can increase the education revolving around Earth ethics and the climate for kids and adults?
Really good point. I think we should do a huge push on education, on ecological education, Earth ethics, climate, and to have it be not only science, the science is important, but also some of these other things that we've been talking about. The church and religious history, the philosophy, the role of white supremacy and colonization. These are all part of a curriculum on Earth ethics. I think that that should be done in schools on all levels. And Center for Earth Ethics is we're doing that a little bit. We have some workshops and classes that we've developed at Union, which is a graduate school of religion. But one of the things we're able to do there is open it up to the public. So we give some classes where you can come even if you're not a student at Union. So we're trying to do more of that. We also are near a place called Teachers College that trains teachers and works on curriculum. And we've had a little bit of conversation with them about how do we create curriculum that could go more into schools, including elementary and middle schools. So I think that it's very important. And one other thing to say about it is we need to learn about climate change. Also, part of that is this whole idea of just awareness of what watershed are you in? When you turn on the light, where does that power come from? When you flush the toilet or throw out the garbage, where does that waste go? What are the natural bodies of water around you? What are the other species that have lived there and live there still? There are just things to know that can help with what has been called ecological citizenship. That I think are really important for all of us, and also really interesting. So I hope that there's going to be more in that. And I know Gordon School is doing some great work already. So excited to hear more about it.
Great. Natasha, we're going to give you the last question.
Well, I just wanted to ask about sort of how, because young people sort of are kept out of the politics world, sort of, because I mean we can't vote and stuff, but I know sort of politics is such a big part of making change. So I guess my question is sort of how can sort of we people as young as I am become involved in politics, and that sort of really important part of making change and that kind of thing. And sort of how has your kind of experience with politics shaped the way you make change or you address this issue?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so when I was growing up, my dad was in, to take the last part of your question first, my dad was in the House of Representatives. He was elected when I was 3 for 8 years, and then he was in the Senate for 8 years, representing Tennessee. And then he was vice president for 8 years, and he ran for president a couple of times. Obviously didn't make it into that office. But I grew up around campaigns and political events of all kinds. And I will say that, the public is the most important character, the protagonist, the public. And voting is a big part of that, you're right. But it's not the only way to engage. Just being present and showing up, asking questions. So I've seen some of these, town hall meetings that happen, whether it's a senator or a congressman or a city council person. They'll have a town hall meeting, and it's people come and ask questions. And I've seen some young people really make a difference by showing up and asking a question at a town hall meeting about climate. Because, it's one of these subjects people don't like to bring it up because they think it's controversial, it's a little bit uncomfortable. And young people have been the ones often at these places, at these town hall meetings, say, okay, no, I'm going to tell it like it is, and I'm going to ask a question. I want you to be accountable. So that's one way that I've seen happen, and it matches what I know from my experience growing up around politics, which is that those are really key moments. Even getting letters and getting calls in offices, political decision makers, it does make a difference. They do pay attention to that stuff as well, and you don't have to be voting age to do it. So those are some ideas.
So thank you. I can definitely see Gordon students stepping up in a town hall asking difficult questions. Karenna, we are almost at our time, and thank you for sticking with us as there were so many good questions. We've gone long. Wonder if you have one question maybe you want to ask this group. Maybe someone will step up and answer, but you've been talking a lot and we've been throwing a lot of questions at you. Would you like to throw one out to our students?
Sure. Good. So first of all, I've loved this time with you all. I'm so impressed with your questions, for real. And I guess I'm interested in is there one thing that you're learning about from this pandemic, shelter in place coronavirus time, and you could say anything, whatever it is that you feel like you've realized or you're learning. And if it connects to the climate or the Earth Day in any way, add that too, but it doesn't have to. That's my question.
Things you're realizing during this time. I see, yep, folks are unmuting. Great, go ahead.
I was just thinking that, like, seeing all of this, like, all of the clean air and, like, the clean waters in Italy, and, like, seeing that, like, it really does take everyone to work and contribute to preventing climate change. It can't just be a couple people. Everyone has to be in together in order for it to really work and for it to really happen. So that's what I've realized.
Thanks, Ellie. Maud?
I'm definitely just feeling grateful for, like, being able to see all my friends and also being able to go to school, and all that is making me feel definitely like once we are able to go back, I'll be aware of how lucky we are to be able to do those things.
Karenna, you might see people on screen doing this motion. It just means me too.
Okay.
Was there anyone else, something you've realized? Eitan?
That I really don't need as much stuff as I have normally.
I think Marielle had something too.
I was gonna say that I feel like the pandemic has really highlighted the things that we kind of take for granted and stuff. So also, and also it's highlighted kind of the issues that we normally say, like, oh, like, now's not the time. Like, I think it's highlighted a lot of issues that usually get put away.
Thanks, Mary Ellie. Natasha, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's kind of a lot of things, just partially because it's a big issue, but also because we have so much time to think now. Now that, like, you know, everything's happening, everything's not happening, sorry. But I think one of the big things is sort of that it's possible for everyone to come together and make a change. Like, a lot of the time, sometimes with climate change, it kind of feels like this big, overwhelming issue that we can't, you know, make change with. But I feel like, in a weird way, this kind of makes me more hopeful for the future, because it shows us that if everyone really sees something as a pressing issue, then they can come together to make a difference, like people have been with social distancing and with quarantining and stuff. So I guess it sort of makes me realize that, like, if we can get everyone to understand just how much climate change is a problem, then it will be possible to make a difference, which is good. It's good stuff. You know, that kind of hope is really important when fighting for change and stuff. So.
Thank you, Natasha.
Definitely.
Ava.
I think it's made me notice like how much the school gives to us, and like also like the privilege we have of an outdoor space at school, and like how easy it is to like not get outside, and how lucky we are to like have that built into our day, to like be able to get outside and like you know what I mean, like get fresh air, because I think a lot of schools don't get that. And I think not being able to go out and do stuff and having to like make sure we go outside has definitely made me notice that.
Thanks, Ava. Raina.
I think I've kind of started to appreciate my family more, because we've been spending a lot more time together than we usually do, because my parents are both working from home. And so it's just been like kind of nice to have that time with them that we wouldn't usually get to have during a normal school year.
Thanks, Raina. Pepper.
I was just kind of noticing, kind of like Natasha, that like a lot of people have said like, oh, we can't just like shut down everything and like fix this big problem like climate change. But like this has showed us like everything has shut down, and it's like we really can if everyone like listens and contributes and treats it like a big crisis, like Corona has been treated. But also that like everyone is really connected, like through social media. Everyone's like, there's been a lot of messages that it's like, we're in this together, and like, don't worry, like we'll support you. And it's like lots of like connecting, and it shows like how connected we are, I guess.
Awesome, Pepper. Thank you. I think that was a great question, Karenna, and appreciate so much your responses, 8th graders. I think if anything, this time has really been a time of reflection and pausing, and thinking about our connections to one another, our connections to the natural world. This interconnectedness is where I think the hope is for coming out of this and addressing, you know, not only the immediate issue around this virus, but the bigger ones that may have seemed so overwhelming. The answers may be simpler than we think, and this time of reflection has given us hopefully that time to see that. So we are at our time. Karenna, I cannot thank you enough. You all can unmute and give a hand if you like. We so appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your work with us. You have an open invitation to join us again, and we know we have an in with Ted that can get you on the line at any moment. And Ted, thank you for your a partnership in making this happen.
It was so fun, and I came away inspired by all of the questions and the answers.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things I miss about seeing this group of, particular 8th graders all together, is the inspiration that they give to us in their interactions with each other in the world. So.
Can I say one last thing?
Please.
Could I say one last thing?
Yes. Please,
I totally forgot, but we have this project on our Center for Earth Ethics site right now, which is a poetry project. And you can see some poems that we've picked out about the Earth. It's at earthstanzas.com, and you can write your own poem there's some prompts from the poems that we've picked out, and you can write your own poem. And there's another portal that has some documents, interesting ones that you can read, including something from the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, and something from an IPCC report, and something from Pope Francis's Laudato Si, and you can interact with those documents as well. I'm sorry, I just remembered that. But it would be really fun if the students wanted to write a little poem using one of the prompts from the model poems. It's earthstanzas.com.
I think we'll be all over that one. So. Thank you so much, Karenna. Karenna, I don't know if you and Ted can just stay for a couple minutes just so I can, Gabe and I can thank you. But 8th graders, thank you so much. You're amazing as usual.
Thank you.
Miss you. And we'll
Thank
see
you.
soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Is the schedule changing at all or no?
So there's